Hi everyone, so thank you once again for joining today's webinar on converting classroom courses to webinar courses within your accessplanit system. My name's Matt, I'm Matt Smalley, I'm the Customer Success Team Lead here at accessplanit, and I also have with me on today's call my colleague Louise Hartley.
Afternoon everyone, hope everyone's okay.
So thank you very much for joining again. A couple of housekeeping rules. We do have a number of functions in our Zoom webinar today, including the chat and the Q&A function. For anyone who was on our previous webinar regarding the impact on the training industry of coronavirus, you know that the chat function was very lively. There's a lot of conversation going on in there. So please feel free to utilize that chat and to start to get thoughts of other people. Any questions, again, do feel free to pop them in the Q&A, and we'll be also conducting a few polls throughout today's webinar. So I'll hand over to my colleague Luke, who will take us through what we're going to cover today.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so for today's session, we've got 4 main key agenda points. The first of which is just to run you through a couple of our latest updates from accessplanit. Just in case you haven't seen any of our most recent correspondence, recent emails, we'll just run you through those just to reconfirm those. Then we're going to move on to transitioning to online courses, so how you can use the system to move any of your current classroom courses over to web, and some of the tools that are at your disposal in order to do that. We'll then move on to the administration of those web courses as well. So that's how you can use the system to help manage those web courses and also provide any follow-up material, for example, to those courses that you hold and run. Last but not least, we'll then move on to some top tricks and tips in the system to help you not only manage and set up those web courses, but also how to get your delegates to engage, how to run a successful webinar, as an example. Okay, so update-wise, the first of which is regarding our training administration licenses. So you may have seen in our most recent communication that throughout this time period, while we go through this period of uncertainty, any training administrator licenses that are in use over and above those that you currently have contracted will not be charged for during this period. This is, I suppose, in view of getting as many all hands on deck to get everything up and running in the system and transitioned over, so it's done in support of you all. But if you have any questions, please do let your CSM know.
Absolutely, and it's something we've noticed quite a lot especially over the last 7 days or so, is as people are mobilising and responding to the current crisis, people are working from home. Some people are having to take unexpected leave and look after family members, and that people just need more flexibility and access into the system, and giving access to people who otherwise wouldn't be responsible for the upkeep of accessplanit. So hopefully this initiative will help you manage your licenses through this current period before we can return to some sense of normality outside of this lockdown period. So hopefully that will give you some peace of mind there to continue using accessplanit and extend that usage to as many people as required.
Absolutely. Cool. So the next update from ourselves is that for all systems, across all of our customer systems, web courses are now enabled in your system.
Yeah, absolutely. Majority of systems would have had web courses activated as usual. Many customers do offer a blended learning approach to their training provision. However, we've taken the step as of this week to enable web courses, the web type of course templates, to every system. So where you may previously not have seen this in your courses area, this should now be visible. If it's not, please drop your CSM or the help desk an email or a ticket through.
Absolutely. Next piece from us is that we have released, for those of you that haven't seen, a couple of blog posts recently with regards to how to best manage web courses and also support your delegates at this time. So we'll be sending out, for those of you that haven't seen it, following today's webinar, those links alongside a copy of the recording, just to provide you with a bit more further information.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone who missed that webinar, it was a fantastic session with one of our friends at the London School of Online, Andy Johnson, who ran through some best practice tips for not just running webinars, but also how trainers should best approach creating that content and delivering that online. Some really useful information in there as well, so we'll be sharing that afterwards.
Cool, thanks Matt. And then the last update from ourselves is just to please, I suppose, echoing what we've just said so far. If you are struggling at any point, if you need any further information, please keep an eye on our changelog post, and please do get in touch with your CSM.
Absolutely. Following this webinar and this week, we'll also be launching our accessplanit Slack channel. If anyone doesn't use Slack, it's a very similar process to forums online, where you can collate thoughts and ideas and things that we're seeing within industry trends, things that people are doing and have taken good initiatives to respond to this ongoing crisis. And also some fun Slack channels as well, you might have seen, of how to keep kids entertained when they're at home during the day, and how to homeschool, and just a few tips and tricks that people are sharing as well with regards to home working and adjusting to life at home. So yeah, we'll be launching that Slack channel this week, and we'll be receiving a
yeah, I've definitely got a few up my sleeve.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Matt now, and Matt's going to run you through live in one of our demo systems how you can set up web courses and how to transition your courses over from classroom to web.
Absolutely, thank you very much for that, Louise. So yeah, transitioning courses from the classroom into online. So firstly, some considerations to think about prior to making the transition and turning all those classes online. One thing that's really important is conducting a technical audit. So not necessarily just in terms of, do we have the right functionality, do you have the right system set up to run this, but do people such as trainers and administrators, do they understand the functionality? Do they have the right equipment in their home? Do they have the right bandwidth in terms of their internet connections to be able to run online courses? So performing a technical audit just to ensure that everything's in place in order to run the course. Again, for those of you who are predominantly face-to-face classroom-based courses, this is pretty much the same as going into a classroom to make sure all the equipment's there and everything's set up correctly. It's exactly the same process. Even though it's online and you don't have that same face-to-face, you can still perform those technical audits just to make sure that everyone has what they need to do. At this point, we do want to take a quick temperature check of all the attendees who are here, who are thinking about running courses or are in the process of transferring online. What webinar functionality you are currently using. So I'm just going to launch a poll through our Zoom app here to see which type of webinar software you're using or you're planning on using as well. So that poll should have popped up. So you should have pop your answers in there in terms of which functionality you're using. Again, that's of real interest to us, and just to see what people are actually starting to use. Let's give a few more seconds on that for those who haven't voted. Okay, so thank you very much for that. So at the moment, what we've just seen come through there is 40% are using Zoom, 30% using Microsoft Teams, 17% are using another software. It'd be really good to hear about that afterwards. And also 7% each for using GoToMeeting and WebEx. So just share those results with you as well. So that's a really interesting spread there. Majority of people using Zoom. That's been in the news quite a lot. If anyone is following the current affairs at the moment, they'll notice that Boris Johnson actually shared a photo of his Microsoft Zoom meeting with the room ID as well. So if anyone fancies joining the cabinet office meetings on Zoom and fancies to see what the latest news is, I'm sure they've changed that by now. But yeah, that was actually shared. I think it was yesterday they shared that by accident. So again, some technical audit there perhaps could be used at number 10 at the moment. Microsoft Teams, we've seen this a lot over the last week. People using Microsoft Teams. We use it internally as well to communicate cross-function and with our teams as well. So Zoom there taking the precedent amongst our customer base. So another consideration then when running courses online and changing over is the preferred method of delivery. So how do people want to absorb that information? Do they want to have it via e-learning? Would they prefer to have it online? If it's e-learning, would they prefer, do you have that capability internally? You need to go and create the e-learning content beforehand. Some interesting stats here about online, especially for clients who haven't actually taken the step to producing online content before, is that 80%, 86% of online learners felt that the course equals or exceeds the price paid. In our previous webinar, we talked a lot about, we had a lot of questions about how do you price online courses? Do we price them any less? Do you price them above? Or should they be at the same price as your face-to-face courses? There's quite an acknowledgement really, or an opinion that because it's an online course and people don't need to make that extra effort in going to a classroom-based course, that perhaps it should come at a reduced price. I think one of our long-standing customers, they actually made a good point on that webinar, that actually it's the content involved rather than the delivery that should dictate the price. And 86% of learners in the survey actually felt that the course equals or exceeds the price paid for an online course. So I certainly don't think you need to be reducing prices necessarily, just because the content is being delivered online, so long as the content and the delivery is of a high standard. And also 74% of academic leaders believe that online learning has better learning outcomes than face-to-face. Again, an interesting stat there. Sometimes people think because it's an online course, it's not, the quality isn't as such as a face-to-face. And again, some really interesting statistics there, just to quash some of those preconceptions about online delivery and online courses. And then finally, some considerations, and the thing we're going to go through today heavily in this webinar is the system administration. So how do we ensure that the TMS you're running is fit for purpose and is ready to be delivering online courses? So that's what we're going to do today, and I'm just going to share my screen and you should be able to see our accessplanit system. So what we're going to go through at the moment is, obviously, there'll be a lot of courses that will be transferring. We have courses that are running face-to-face that we now need to adjust to be able to run in an online fashion. So we're going to go through a few options of how you can manage this, and different ways and tips and tricks of how you can actually make that transfer from the classroom into an online as smoothly as possible. So in our courses section, we have our calendar, and we're just going to go through a couple of examples here. So firstly, our manual handling course that we have running on the 6th of April. If I just go to my delegate screen, you can see a list of all the delegates who are currently booked on this course, booked to attend this course. You can see who is the status of booked, who is due to attend. What we've seen a lot of customers do is they've wanted to create a communication to send to all delegates to understand, to take a temperature check of whether they're still attending the courses and to update them on their policies. One thing that's worked really well is using a custom field. So against each delegate, we've created a custom field that I can choose to send bulk communication to. So choosing a specific field here, COVID-19 communication, I can have a workflow set up based on that trigger point. What that also does as well, it allows for some historic reporting. So even though we're in the midst of trying to transition and trying to readjust to life at the moment, in 6 to 9 months' time, in a year's time, when you want to look back and reflect on the number of delegates that were affected, that will also provide an additional reporting tool to see who was affected, and you can report back on those. And you can also start to market and campaign to those delegates who may not have attended. So again, using that COVID-19 communication, we've seen a lot of customers send out communications based on that being checked. So you can create that within the system as a custom field in the administration area. Now, dependent on your policies as well, what a lot of people are doing is putting places on hold. So allowing the delegates to decide whether or not they want to transfer to an online course, if they want to transfer to an online course, when that course will take place. So again, we have a number of statuses in the system against each delegate. So you can change their status to on hold. Again, communication set up to reflect what that status reflects. So on hold status would be sending a delegate an email to confirm their place on hold and to contact the administration team to make a booking onto an online course. Another option as well is to allow delegates to defer their place. So rather than anticipating delegates to choose a course now, you may actually give them the option to defer. So rather than placing these on hold, you may wish to defer the place. Now, this is quite common across various industries at the moment. I know a lot of airlines are doing this as well. I certainly had an email from an airline to allow me to do this. Rather than refunding delegates, what a lot of people have done is choose to defer the place. Now, what that would do is allow you to retain the income, retain the revenue within the organisation, and instead you can issue vouchers to those delegates instead. So rather than actually refunding and transferring potentially, within the finance area, you can choose to create vouchers. Now, if anyone doesn't use vouchers at the moment, these can be used as a payment method. So another consideration here is to ensure that that payment method is set up and is in use through the checkout area, through your shopping basket. However, at this point, we can add a new voucher. This might be for our leadership course. Purchase price might be $8.95 and it retains the same value. You could also set lifetimes around this as well. So for people to be able to book, they have to return to the course within the next 12 months. And you can set the usage start and end dates within there. And then importantly, you need to choose the exclusivity. So which course is this particular voucher exclusive for? You can add the leadership and management course. So when you issue this voucher, people will only be able to choose this in that leadership and management online course. And then we can start issuing the voucher from here. Now what this will do, it will allow that person to book on one of your leadership and management courses at any point within the next 12 months. So rather than having to go through and manually transfer every delegate that comes through, you can give them the voucher, you can issue that voucher to the delegates for them to go and make their own purchases through the system and book themselves on a later course. So that's another option we've seen a lot of people start to take up, is using the voucher functionality as a way of deferring the income, deferring people attending courses, yet still retaining that delegate attending one of your online courses. Okay. Finally, what a lot of people have also done as well is, if they are simply transferring that course from a day course, from a one-day course, they're going to just produce that course online for their delegates. So rather than actually cancelling or postponing any particular course, what a lot of people have done as well is just simply run that course in an online format. We'll come on to some best practice around this a little bit later on, about how the length of time and whether or not it's a good idea to run a full day course as online, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on. But this is an option. So retaining that classroom-based course for ease, you can simply change the venue and you could potentially just use a virtual room. So keeping that course and simply using a venue of a virtual room that would contain the dial-in details, contain the webinar details, that can also be another option. So to cut down on that administration, simply retain the classroom-based course, change the venue to a virtual room. Now, if I was to go into my resources and have a look at that virtual room as a venue, see here we've got virtual room 1 and 2. I can actually see in the description of my resource, I have my virtual room. So that can be used as a merge field in the email template to send to the delegates, so they know how to actually attend the course. That can actually be sent using this description against the resource. So we get another option there for you to simply change the venue into a virtual room and ensure that's sent. A consideration for those using webinar software for the first time is just to make sure that virtual room is a general room rather than a bespoke room for each individual webinar. As an example, today, the link you will have taken you into this today, into this webinar, will have been unique to today's session. That is a general virtual room. And then finally, the option is to recreate these courses. So if you are deferring places and you are transferring people to different courses, you'll need to have those online courses set up within your accessplanit system. So within these courses here, if I just edit this particular course, so this is a web course, and the difference with a web course is you have these two options below. You have the trainer details and you have the webinar delegate details. So this will allow you to put in the login details there to the trainer so they can receive all their login details. And this would also be included in a merge field to the delegates. So the delegates would be receiving the communications and they would also have the ability to log in. As some really good best practice around this, we'd heavily suggest that you send out reminders a day before and also probably 30 minutes to an hour before the webinar as well. Then people will start to be logging in, they'll start to be setting down to attend the course. Again, if you can have that at the top of their inbox, that would be really useful as well. So some best practice there, about an hour or so before the course, resend those webinar details in here. So in terms of transitioning, just to recap there, some best practice around transitioning your courses from the class to online. Firstly, repurpose venues if needed. So if you can choose to use virtual rooms in there and you are simply transitioning all of the classroom offering into online and delegates are still going to be attending as usual, you can simply repurpose that venue. Next, email all delegates to confirm the attendance and the technical availability. So ensure that delegates have the means to attend the course. Now, everyone is blessed with having laptops at home. Most people probably will do if they are working from home at the moment. Again, it's always best practice just to double check that they have the technical availability to make that particular course. And finally, ensure all communications and features are ready. So if you are changing statuses to on hold or deferred, you are changing people from classroom-based courses to webinar-based courses, make sure the workflows are correct. If you're unsure about this, you're not hugely confident on doing this, please get in touch with accessplanit with your CSMs and we can help you and support you during this process. Again, we're here for any support you need at this time. We can help you transition that and ensure your workflows are set up and ready to go. So once the transition has been made and we're looking at managing and administering online courses, there's a few really good best practice things to talk through as well.
Yeah.
So,
the first of which, if I can jump in there, Matt, is just to make sure that you're utilising all of your course template features. So these are going to include, as Matt showed you there on screen, making sure that you're including your dialing details for your delegates and your trainers well in advance of the workflow sending out. You're also utilising those workflows to also help reduce some of that administration. So sending your reminders, sending the joining instructions, and also your booking confirmations as well, and really reducing some of that administration from your admin teams. One other feature that we'd quite like to highlight as well today is, and potentially may not have been taken into consideration so far, is also utilising surveys against your web courses as well. Now, I'm conscious a lot of customers do this already for Classroom, but it may also be a worthwhile opportunity for you to also set up surveys for web courses too, and start to gather feedback from those courses as you're running them, and taking that feedback on board live as it comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. One major consideration is because you are running online courses, you are able to change the content and change the structure really quickly. You're able to adapt and adjust the course on probably a much quicker basis than you would do face-to-face with people and trainers not necessarily being in the same room at the same time. So surveying customers, understanding how they are receiving your courses is hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely. So second one, Matt, you've just touched on it there with your examples, is deciding on whether or not you are going to use those virtual rooms or if you're going to use any individual meeting rooms themselves. Again, it very much will become what your preference is, but it's important to decide those ahead of running the webinar.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. That's just a consideration to make sure that the administration is correct as well. Again, it might cut down in some of your administration, and again, make sure the trainers are aware of how they should be accessing the online course too.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next one, Matt's already mentioned it already, just with those earlier examples, is making sure that you're sending timely reminders to delegates and your trainers as well, making sure they've all got their login details, their dial-in details well in advance, and also that reminder just ahead of the course starting, of the online course starting. Okay, and last but not least is also making sure that copies of that learning material, copies of that webinar are also made available after the session. And you can utilize this or make this available with your workflows. You can also send copies of learning materials, copies of any of the recordings, any PowerPoint slides, etc., over to your delegates after the session using your workflows and also your portal areas potentially as well.
Absolutely. So just to go back into the system then, we're just going to have a quick look at course templates and setting up those webinar-based courses. So when we're in our course template area, and I think this is really important to using web courses, is making sure that the communications are correct. So a lot of webinar courses, a lot of online courses are used as part of a blended learning package, whether that be part of an e-learning course as well. Creating a sessional course and sending out documentation at the right time to delegates is really, really important, especially with online courses. With face-to-face, you can always make sure that people understand the topic and people can receive, they can write workbooks, the right paper, handouts, and so on and so forth. With the web courses, we need to make sure we're constantly engaging with delegates, constantly being at the forefront of their mind during a course, especially if it's spread over a few days. So when we're creating an online course here, so we'll just create a new project management online course. Obviously, the course template type will be changed to web if we're running a type of web through the system. We have very similar options here to our online, to our face-to-face offering, things for delivery method, whether they're in-house or public, external IDs, the administrators, and so on. One major difference is obviously changing the duration. Typically, you wouldn't run a 3-day online course, you would separate that out into different sessions. The cost of the course, again, deciding whether or not to charge the same price, higher or lower. Then you also have the document template. So again, it's still possible to send the sign-in sheets to trainers before the course. And that's a really top tip as well. This is something one of our university clients actually encountered, or something they highlighted as a risk, is if you are using a webinar software that uses virtual rooms, that has a dedicated room, it isn't necessarily possible in all online web software to restrict access. So people could still enter the room at various points. So again, that might be a really good idea to send out sign-in sheets and registers to trainers to understand who is genuinely booked on the course. If people are accidentally joining, that may be a potential issue. Again, certification can still be part of an online course offering. So you can still use the certificates, you can still send out those certifications to ensure most people have completed and attended a course. And again, the surveys. So ensuring that all of the surveys are still sending out to people. So people aren't necessarily missing out on the survey, and you are taking the right information from people. So sending out those pre-course surveys, the post-course surveys, and the trainer surveys to understand how the delivery is going, especially if you're new to this particular process. One thing not to overlook is surveying the trainers to get their feedback, to understand how they felt the session went. We'll come on to some tips and tricks around how you manage an online course in a second. But again, some really crucial things there to make sure you are taking a temperature check of your client base. So once we save this, we do have the same options as we have for our classroom-based course. You still have the joining instructions, you have the aims, the objectives, and the summaries. One tip and trick for people here is you can add files in here. So if you do want to send out documentation, you want to create a standard workflow, you can add files, you can add documentation to be sent within an email, whether that's pre-work before an online course for people to read up on, whether it's workbooks for people to go through prior to attending the course. You can still send out all this documentation prior to the course running. One of the questions we've had through there is, can I use a sessional course functionality to ensure you're delivering bite-sized learning? Absolutely, you can create these as sessional courses as well. That's something we'd actually heavily recommend, is as part of an online delivery, running a full day online can be quite tiring, can be quite a lot. From our experience as well, we do deliver webinar training to our clients. It can be quite a taxing day for people to sit through online, listening to a trainer go through everything, as interactive as it might be. Anyone who was on our webinar a week or so ago would know that 90 minutes is typically about right for an online course, and splitting that out into different sessions and different days is highly recommended. So once we've created our course in here, we can then go into our courses area in our web section, and we can create our new web course. So from here, we can choose our project management online, and we can save that course as usual. Now, once this course is ready, again, as I mentioned, you have the trainer webinar details and the delegate webinar details, as you would do for a web course, and you also have the option to add the trainer in here. So the management at this point is very, very similar to the classroom-based courses. Again, we can see the course has appeared in our calendar as well. And so we're going to move on now. I'm going to have a talk through a few top tips and tricks for running online courses. So firstly, setting up online courses, as we've previously mentioned, it's not recommended that you replicate a full day of training. You can understand sometimes that that it is, people are tempted to replicate a full day because they feel as though they need to deliver that value. However, it's a really good opportunity now to do bite-sized learning, to take a blended learning approach to your training offering. So again, spreading this out over a few days, changing it into different sessions can actually really help people learning and understand the outcomes of the training you're trying to deliver. Again, try not to replicate a full day of training, see if you can condense that down into different sections. We actually had a couple of customers asking us how we'd recommend you do that. How do you recommend you split a full day down that's never been split down before? I'd speak to your trainers about this, but typically when you're trying to split this out into sort of 90-minute sessions, there tends to be a natural break in the day, and your trainers will know this in particular. When you reach a part in the morning when you decide to stop and have a tea break or a coffee break, that typically forms a natural break within the training cycle to have the next session start in a few hours or indeed the next day. So I would talk to your trainers about this. They'll know from their experience at what point do they see delegates start to flag a little bit, at what point they think actually now's a good time to have a refreshment break. That would typically be a good indicator for when to end that first session, that first online session.
It's also quite, just taking experience from one of our own recent training sessions at accessplanit, to utilise, if you've got it in the software provider that you're using, breakout rooms. So Zoom in particular has breakout rooms. And in a recent training session we had that should have been an all-day face-to-face session, our trainer utilised the breakout rooms. As Matt says, when you get to that natural flagging point, or there's a break or opportunity for an exercise, break your delegates out into those rooms and you can continue that participation.
Absolutely. Next, as I've mentioned before, make sure you're sending materials pre and post course. Again, engagement is really important for online delivery, to make sure people are engaging before the course and make sure they're engaging after the course as well. So again, continue to communicate with delegates, continue to communicate with your clients, sending out the communication, sending out that information around the course for people to read up on prior to and following the course. Next, as we mentioned, survey customers and be ready to adjust. So again, maybe you might need support in creating some new online surveys, especially if people who are just delivering face-to-face courses now, they need a tool online to start surveying clients. There is a survey tool within accessplanit that will be included in your system. You can speak to your CSM if you need help setting that up. We highly recommend surveying customers, trying to understand what you can improve and acting on that quickly. So again, if you are new to online delivery, start to make some changes as soon as you start to get some feedback as well. That will really enhance the offering.
Yeah, one thing you could also take into consideration, just extending that survey piece, is not only getting the feedback from the initial course, but also putting in place almost like a grow model. So 4 weeks down the line, or potentially when things return to normality, potentially surveying and see how that learning, how that knowledge done during that webinar session has been applied.
Absolutely. And finally, follow up with recordings and materials. So anything that's used during the session, again, it might not be included as standard during the post-course materials. Make sure that's sent through along with any recordings. Again, it's tapping into the way different people learn and absorb information. Some people will prefer to reflect on what they've learned, to reflect on recordings and watch it again. So again, be ready to send up those follow-up recordings. One thing that's really useful in the system is creating a custom field. If you are able to do this using your webinar software, creating a custom field for sending out recordings. It's a really good tool in the system to use as a custom field, and you can include that as part of a workflow and merge field as well. You can send out the webinar recording as part of the web course. Just share my screen again here. You can input a free text field to include a webinar recording so the delegates can re-watch that session in the future. Next, a few tips as well for running online courses. So utilize webcams and use spot questions. So firstly appear approachable to the delegates. So using webcams, people can visualize the trainers, they can visualize who is delivering the course, and also encourage delegates to turn on their webcams. Again, I think I've seen this use really go up since people started working from home. It's interesting having calls with clients and you speak to them who are also in their living room or their home offices, but it's a really good way of creating a bond with delegates and building that rapport. Naturally, online training can be more difficult to build rapport to, but utilizing webcams can really help with that. And next, use spot questions. So it's also difficult to actually understand whether people are absorbing information and are actively participating in the session. That can be a little bit more difficult using online courses. So using spot questions, asking people questions on the fly during the sessions can be a really useful tool. Next, take regular breaks and activities. Again, a really big tip for the trainers here. Sometimes if there's activities during the online course, the trainers would naturally have their own break at that point. Ensure the delegates are taking regular breaks every 45 minutes or so. A 5-10 minutes leg stretch would be really useful, and using lots of activities, keep them engaged. Don't just turn it into a 90-minute session of a trainer talking at them. Again, using those regular breaks and activities can really enhance the engagement on online courses. Again, using chat features and polls to increase engagement also allows you to see who is engaging with the webinar. So using those chat features, allowing people to build rapport amongst themselves. As Lou mentioned, Zoom has a really good feature of using breakout rooms. Again, start to utilize those as much as you can. And finally, encourage some self-reflection and feedback using those breakout rooms and also within sessions. So in between sessions, if you are running bite-sized courses, try and encourage delegates to reflect, to perform some activities and to come back and talk through the activities they've done, almost as homework perhaps. Use and encourage that self-reflection time to really enhance the learning. That's a real positive and a real opportunity for all training providers during this particular time, is to start to utilize different methods of training. So using 90-minute bite-sized chunks spread over a few days can actually really enhance people's learnings and outcomes for training. Okay, so we're just going to go through a few of the questions we've had through on the chat. So there's a question here from Franz, which was the value, the price value based on the face-to-face price? I presume it is to do with the vouchers and creating vouchers within the systems. The vouchers themselves can be based on, there's two things here the vouchers can be based on. There's the purchase price and the value. So typically a use case for a voucher is to purchase £5,000 worth of vouchers, but they're actually worth £6,000 to increase people purchasing them. So the two options here are the purchase price and the value. If you are just replacing a course that perhaps costs £895, the purchase price and the value would typically be the same, unless you want to offer an additional percentage or additional sum for people to rebook. We had another question as well, which is, do we need to build a new set of workflows for web-based courses, or can existing ones be adapted? This really depends on how your workflows have been set up. So just to talk through quickly in the workflow area, your workflows will be set up either using user course date or user course date class if you're running face-to-face. If it's user course date class and you're running a web-based course, you'll need to recreate those workflow templates. If you're using user course date, you could potentially just adjust those delegates instead, just those workflows instead. So just double check the modules you're using. If you're unsure, reach out to accessplanit and we can help, and we can also help transfer those over.
Okay, one other question that's been asked is, I suppose, when we return to a period where classroom and face-to-face courses are possible again, how easy will it be to switch up those web courses back over that you scheduled as webinars over to classroom courses?
Yeah, I suppose it depends really on how you've transitioned them over. If you transition them over to web-based courses, then you'll need to then recreate them as classroom-based courses. If you've left them as classroom-based courses and use virtual rooms, then you can obviously just change the venue back. So it depends on how you go about it. If you do utilize that web course functionality, then you would need to transfer those web courses and recreate them as classroom-based courses. I suppose a consideration outside of that, though, is if delegates have booked it on the basis that it's online, whether or not they would be open to having to attend a course. Sometimes the arrangements around a course and having to travel might dictate that they would anticipate that being an online course when they booked it. So it might be worth just double checking what the best way to go about that is. But that's just another consideration for you too.
Okay.
So another one, which is, I'll ask you, let you take this one, Luke. Do you think web courses will become a bigger trend after this? It's an interesting question.
No, it's an interesting one. We were discussing this not only at home but at work as well. I mean, there's definitely a trend towards it as well, like you say there, with people not, potentially people that can't travel. You can certainly reach a wider audience, especially if you think about how you can market these courses as well online with website integration. I think there's definitely going to be a trend towards web courses, but I still personally do feel that there is a requirement for face-to-face courses and having that interaction, like human interaction as it were, and actually seeing people physically in a room compared to web. But there's benefits to both. So I'm interested to see what the trend is. I'm following it quite closely personally myself as well.
Absolutely. And there's a question as well, are there disadvantages with using virtual rooms? This seems much easier than setting up a whole new set of courses and workflows. As I mentioned earlier on, if you are using virtual rooms, it depends on the webinar software. Sometimes webinar software allows you to use virtual rooms. If it does, it can allow people just to enter the virtual room if they have the link, so they could enter at different times outside of their course. If that's the case, then you need to check whether or not there's any security reasons there. The trainer should have the ability to remove them. Going back to our sign-in sheets and registers would be important to set up. But yeah, it depends on the web software you're using. Sometimes it dictates it's a unique link created for every webinar. So in that case, the web courses would be just as efficient, and there wouldn't be a benefit to using the virtual room as a venue. But it depends on the webinar software you're using. If the webinar software allows virtual rooms, so that you can just keep adding it, there'd be one room per trainer essentially, then yeah, virtual rooms are probably the easiest way to go in terms of administration. But it depends on the webinar software you're using.
Okay, any other questions?
I've
had one other question with regarding vouchers and whether or not the revenue, the purchase of the voucher, will show as revenue for the month it was used, and also tracking the invoices that the vouchers are associated to.
Absolutely. So if a delegate was to rebook on, the voucher would be a type of payment method. So when they get to the end of the shopping basket, they would then apply their voucher. So a new invoice would be generated for that new course, and that would be a voucher, would go back to them from there.
Okay. I suppose the only other thing for myself to add is also it may be of interest to you to look at reporting on web delegates as well. Don't forget that you can utilise your dashboard areas very well for this. You can set up not only a new dashboard area for managing your web delegates alongside your consumer and reporting on those. Similarly, you can use your smart grid options and your filters in there to report on any delegates that you might have deferred, any delegates that you might have popped into those different statuses that Matt showed you earlier in the webinar. If you need any support in setting those up, please do contact either your CSM or your support team at accessplanit.
Yeah, absolutely. Following this issue and following this crisis as we come out of it, again, reporting on the delegates who have received the communication would be fairly straightforward using your delegate smart grids. You would also be able to report on the delegates who have deferred their place as well. So again, ensuring that those delegates are following up and are rebooking courses. You can set up filters using your data grid. This would also be available in Report Writer and on the dashboard too, to ensure you're following up on delegates who have deferred places. So again, setting these up as filters, really straightforward, exactly the same as you would do for any other status. You can create these in the delegate smart grid to ensure you can see which delegates are you potentially going to rebook on once this lockdown finishes.
Okay. No other questions so far?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much everyone for attending today's session. I hope you found that useful. If you have any follow-up questions or you need any additional support during this time, as we mentioned before, do feel free to get in touch with your CSM and the help desk. more than happy to help people in this transitionary period. There'll be further communications going out this week about our new accessplanit Slack channel. Do feel free to post on that, do feel free to engage. Again, we hope it's going to be useful and give people tips and tricks, not just in terms of the training industry, but also adjusting to life working from home. And we'll also be launching a few more customer support initiatives as we go through this, and we'll be reacting to the conditions of what we hear from clients. So please feel free to get in touch with your CSMs. Let's just help us understand the challenges you're facing and if we can help you overcome them. So please feel free to get in touch with us with any questions you've got. And yeah, I hope everyone stays safe, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much for attending. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.